الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد So last week I talked about objectification of the Qur'an, and this week I want to talk about one science that as Muslims, and many Muslims have used as a way that they have objectified the Qur'an. Keep in mind that objectification of the Qur'an is very bad. And for those of you who were here last week, numbers grow. So I'm sure all of you were not here, unless you were angels. But we know that objectifying the Qur'an is very bad, and many people objectify the Qur'an in so many different ways. There's one science that exists within the Muslim realm, exists within Muslims. And Muslims give it a lot of importance. A lot of importance. And that is called the science of, what is it? The science of Tajwi. The science of Tajwi. The science of Tajwi is that science wherein we learn the art of the recitation of the Qur'an. It is that science, the definition of which the scholars of Islam have said, إعطاء الحروف حقها من صفة لها ومستحقها. That's the definition of Tajweed. That science wherein you are pronouncing the letters of the Qur'an, giving every letter its rights, and pronouncing these letters in a very beautiful manner. This is what the word, this is what the science of Tajweed is. So if you were to sit down or go to a scholar who is a specialist of the science of Tajweed, like myself, and you sit down with them and you tell them, can you teach me Tajweed? So this individual, the first thing they're going to teach you is, well, here's how you pronounce the letters. This is the letter Alif, say A, say Ba, say Ta. They're going to tell you how to pronounce the letters. After that, then they're going to tell you when these two letters are combined, that you skip the first letter, or you have to stretch, nasalize the sound, like the word inna, spelled alif noon, or in English A and A. They'll tell you whenever you have a double, two consonants, whether it be the letter N or the letter M, noon or mim, they need to drag the sound. So don't say inna, say inna. Don't say thumma, say thumma. You get it? You just can't stretch it. And then you also learn the letter noon or the letter N. In English, the letter N, where you requires you to take the tip of your tongue and touch, the teeth in the front, touch the gums in the back. You say N, N. That's how you pronounce the letter N in English. But then there's also a sound which we call ikhfa, hiding the sound of the noon. And hiding the sound of the noon means you don't touch you don't take your tongue, you don't physically take two articulators and touch anywhere at all. You just nasalize the sound. You just say it's a nasal sound. That's all it is. So for example, if you're reading the word ankana, you're going to say ankana. You nasalize it. You didn't touch the N sound, you just nasalize the sound. And then you also learn in Tajweed, you learn the science wherein you as an individual have to stretch the vowels out. So certain places you stretch the vowel, right? For example, a vowel A, E, I, O, U, or in Arabic, alif, waw, ya, fatha, dhamma, kasra, you need to stretch them certain times. So you are not to say the word ma'a M-A-A, ma'a, rather you have to stretch it. Ma'a, to stretch it. You see, when I was reading, I was saying, غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ. I stretched it because I know the rules of Tajwi. So this is what you learn in the science of Tajwi. You learn all of these different rules. So this is what happens when you are to go study Tajwi. Now, talking about the objectification of the Qur'an. One way that a lot of Muslims have objectified the Qur'an is directly related to sciences that have been derived within Quranic recitation. For example, the science of tafsir. The science of tafsir, a lot of people have objectified the Qur'an through the science of tafsir. And how have they objectified the Qur'an through the science of tafsir? Last week I explained it to you that many times people are going to say, oh, this is what the verse means. Or this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Qur'an said, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ. So the word إِيَّاكَ came before the word نَعْبُدُ. So when this happens like this, then this is the meaning that it gives. Or when because of this specific letter over here, إِنَّمَا حَرَّمَ, because of the letter meen, إِنَّمَا, that appeared within this verse, the meaning, happens like this. And then they use their grammatical explanations towards trying to understand the meanings behind the Qur'an. And they get so indulged in this, and they're so, this is what the word means, and they're so, drenched and drowning in this amazing grammar, analysis of the Qur'an that you lose total focus regarding what the Qur'an was actually there for. So, for example, you're so much into grammatically analyzing the Qur'an, and we're going to analyze it and grammatically analyze it. Do you know why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said alhamdu and not just hamdan lillahi? The word al before hamdu. And then now you start realizing the word al can come in 75 different meanings, and this is what each one of those meanings actually mean. And then they just go on and on and on and on, and then the next morning, at Fajr time, they slept through. Which kind of defeated the whole purpose, you see, because the idea behind the Qur'an was that you actually woke up for Fajr, or that you were worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all of these meanings that you derive from the Qur'an, it's not going to benefit you in any way, shape, or form. I mean, it is not going to benefit you in any way, shape, or form if you're not going to rectify and change your lifestyle to the way the Qur'an was, because I don't think so. And there's no hadith about it regarding the Prophet ﷺ actually sitting down with the companions and physically analyzing verses of the Qur'an the way we see scholars doing nowadays. Kills the purpose. You see, now what you've done is objectified it. And you say, you know what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the word alhamdu, put the al before the word hamdu, and it's inclusive of all of these different meanings. And my question to you is, how do you know? Are you God? Do you know exactly what God meant when He said that? No. So this objectification is very, very popular. When it comes to the science of tajweed, one of the biggest issues that I have, and here's one of my colleagues came up to me, a scholar, and he told me, he said, Uthman, if you keep on giving lectures like this, people are going to hate on you. I said, well, who cares if they hate on me? But he said, if you're going to keep on giving lectures like this, it's kind of a contradiction, because you teach tajweed. You see, I'm known for being a scholar of the Qur'an. That's what I've done for a life. I mean, I have a specialization at takhassus in tafsir, and this is what I do. I know the varied recitations of the Qur'an and all that good stuff. See, I've done that. I've specialized and I've spent about 15 years doing all that stuff. But then I come and give a lecture saying that, well, all that stuff is bad. I'm not saying it's all bad, because that's a paradox, right? Like, what are you trying to say? Well, the point I'm trying to make is, what is the reason, what is the purpose behind the Qur'an? What is the purpose behind the Qur'an? There's no point you beautifying the recitation of the Qur'an if that Qur'an is not entering into your heart. You get it? There's no point you going in so detailed, sitting in halaqas of tafsir and explanation of the Qur'an, or focusing all of your attention on perfecting the sound of that nasalized an-kana, if that's not going to assist you in reciting the Qur'an on your own. There's no point in you doing all that beautification if the purpose behind that is that you go ahead and just sit down in front of audiences and recite the Qur'an. No, there's no point behind that. Why are you beautifying this this recitation of the Quran? Why are you trying your best to study tajweed as a science? And if we don't, what happens is, again, and I mentioned this earlier, last week, where a lot of us Muslims, what we need to do is we need to read our history. We need to know our history. If we are not going to read our history, and if we're not going to know our history, you're just not going to understand the reason why you exist. You're not going to know why you're there. You're not going to know anything about yourself. The problem is what? That we tend to view history from our rear view mirror. When you're driving, you have your rear view mirror. That's how you're viewing history. But you don't see too much. You see, and then the car pulls up next to you, and you think that, well, I know which cars were coming by, so I know I can just change lanes without actually looking in my blind spot because I was looking at my rear view mirror. A lot of people do that. They didn't realize there was actually an exit over there coming in, and the car actually pulled in under an accident. You were like, oh my God, I checked my rear view mirror. But you view history that way. Don't do that. If you want to know what history is, go back and live it. Or go back and view it from the front, and you can actually see everything in front of you. Now what happens is, from that point of view, the science of tajweed was a science which was initiated about 300, 400 years after the Prophet ﷺ migrated from Mecca to Medina. And it's a very interesting point here. It's the idea then and the idea now. What was the mindset then when they were studying tajweed, and what is the mindset now that we're studying tajweed? The mindset now when we study tajweed is we want to beautify our recitation of the Qur'an, or we want to recite the Qur'an the way the Prophet ﷺ recited the Qur'an, or all of these ideas. The idea then, the reason tajweed was codified at that time was because they wanted to preserve the Qur'an. They wanted to what? Preserve the recitation of the Qur'an. The mindset is different now. You see, the mindset now is, well, we think the Qur'an is automatically preserved, so we don't feel that need anymore. So if you were to ask someone, well, why are you reciting the Qur'an with tajweed? They're going to tell you, well, the reason I'm reciting the Qur'an with tajweed is because I want to recite it the way the Prophet ﷺ recited the Qur'an. Yes or no? However, if you were to ask this question to, back during that time, well, why are you reciting the Qur'an with tajweed and why are you focusing on this? They will tell you because we want to preserve the Qur'an. Because at that time, there was the fear that the Qur'an would have been erased, removed. So now what happens is you want to be able to preserve the Qur'an. What type of preservation are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the type of preservation wherein an individual is reciting it exactly how the Prophet ﷺ recited the Qur'an. Mindset is different. Why was this science coming into religion? Why is there so much force for it? Again, go back into history. After the Prophet ﷺ, peace be upon him, after he had passed away, as mentioned in the narration, the Battle of Yamama took place. The Battle of Yamama, wherein a lot of Muslims who had memorized the Quran had passed away. So Umar, radiallahu anh, the second Caliph, he came to Abu Bakr, radiallahu anh. They were really good friends. And he came to him and he told him that we need to preserve the Quran. We need to preserve the Quran. Well, why? Well, because if we're not going to preserve the Quran, what's going to happen is these Huffaz, the people who memorize the Quran, if they're just going to keep on dying in these battles, we're going to lose the Quran. What was the guidance that the Muslims had? All they had was the Quran. That's all they had as a reference book for them to live their life. Besides, the fact that the Khalifa was there, the leader of the Muslims was there. But if someone was, living in some area where there was no other Muslims there, what else did they have? They just had the Quran with them. So the only way, that we could, continue the religion of Islam was to preserve the Quran. So they made an effort, and that effort led a few individuals to get together and, make a copy of the Quran. And they wrote these copies down into scrolls, suhuf, based on which, it became known as the Mus'haf. And eventually, this compilation of the Quran, remained as that version or that, compilation of the Quran, or that Quran that, that was there for the guidance of the Muslims. Now, during the time of Umar, radiallahu anh, his main mindset was to, besides the fact that we need to establish and we need to, bring, people into Islam, one major point behind Umar radiallahu anh and his khilafah was that he wanted to establish that Muslim state. So what he did is he had the Muslims who were living in Medina at that time, and he stopped a lot of the Muslims to leave Medina and rather stay stay within Medina. Different individuals were going to the different countries, and conquering those different countries, and and spreading religion over there. But the people that were in Medina, they were to stay in Medina. Why? Because he wanted to establish a specific concept which is very, very popular in the Maliki school of thought. And what is that concept? It's called Amalu Ahli Medina. Amalu Ahli Medina means the practice of the people of Medina. The practice or the action of the people of Medina basically was there to reinforce what we call tawatur, or to reinforce a specific action. So, if, for example, we don't know how to do something in Islam, someone comes to the masjid and says, well, how are you supposed to pray? Well, if someone had never been exposed to how prayer is supposed to happen, and all they had was the Qur'an, they would not be able to tell you how prayer should be done. All they would know is, well, you have to recite Qur'an, you have to do ruku, you have to do sajda. They would give you parts of the prayer, but there would be no place where it says that when you have to stand up, facing the qibla is there, but you need to stand up, raise your hands like this, and then tie your hands, and then, do ruku like this, make sure you do ruku that way, stand up after ruku, go into sajda this way, sit down between the two sajdas, because these things are not mentioned in the Qur'an, right? They're not mentioned in the Qur'an. Certain hadith will mention it, but a lot of this was dependent on what? The action, how people had done it. Well, they've been doing it for generations. But they've been doing it for centuries. They've been doing this for such a long time. Well, how do you pray? Well, that's why every single Muslim in the world prays exactly the same way. There's the same concept where you stand up, you bend down, you go all the way down to the ground, you sit down between the two sajdas. When you say Assalāmu, Alaikum, you turn your head to the right, to the left. This concept is there because it's been passed down for so many generations, true or false. That's how we do it. If someone were to just rely on the Qur'an, they'd never be able to figure out how it's done, or even that order, or even the specific order, unless they were sitting with individuals who are scholars, and they would depend that prayer on how it was done. So Umar bin Khattab, radiallahu anh, he was there to establish Amalu Ahli Medina, the action of the people of Medina. Why? So that there would be an Islamic state where all of the practices within that state reflected the practice at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So if you were to actually go into Medina, the way people were acting over there was based on Islam. You get it? The way people were eating food was how the Prophet trained them, because they stayed in that city. The way they were praying was how it was done. The way they were talking, the way they were walking, the way they were dealing with one another. This was an action that was just passed on from the time of the Prophet. They didn't leave, they continued doing it that way. And that's why the bulk of the Maliki fiqh, or one of the usul, is Amalu Ahli Medina. How the people of Medina have actually done, or have actually, worshipped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's how people end up, worshipping Allah, worshipping God that way. Anyhow, during the time of Uthman bin Affan, the third Khalif, very interesting that the Muslims among themselves were arguing based on the recitation of the Qur'an. And this happened, there was one battle where the Muslims were conquering Armenia and Azerbaijan in that area. And while they were in the Armenian front, the Muslim army consisted of people from Syria, consisted of people from Kufa and Basra, consisted of people from Hims and different areas. And they were all within the Muslim army up there in the forefront of this battle. Now, as Muslims, what do Muslims do? We need to pray 5 times a day, yes or no? And when we pray 5 times a day, we recite the Qur'an in our prayers, the way it is in Maghrib. So now we're reciting the Qur'an. As one individual was reading, he perhaps was reading Maghrib, Salah, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin. And then another individual from Basra, he said, it's not Maliki Yawmiddin, it's Maliki Yawmiddin. He said, oh my God. So within the army, that was there in the forefront of Azerbaijan and Armenia, within that same army, there were Muslims differing in the recitations of the Qur'an. So, Hudayfa, who was there, he took this to the leader at the time, Sa'id, and he told him, he said, well, we have a little bit of an issue, but what's the problem? He says, within the Muslims, within our army, there's, people are arguing with one another regarding specific recitations of the Qur'an. You get it? Some are saying it's Maliki, some are saying it's Maliki, some are saying, Qad aflaha, some are saying Qad aflaha, etc. So this issue was brought to the Khalifa Uthman bin Affan, who, he also said that I've realized the same problem within Medina, where people are reciting the Qur'an in different ways. They're not changing the meaning, they're just different accents. Now this accent becomes a little bit vital when someone who doesn't know the language is exposed to the accent. We'll get to that in a second. So he decided that what we need to do is we need to, make copies of the Qur'an. We need to make copies of the Qur'an. So he took that copy that was that copy that was compiled at the time of Abu Bakr and Umar, and he took it, put it down, and then he gathered 4 companions and he told them, I want you guys to make about 5 copies. And we're going to send these 5 copies to the 5 garrison towns, the 5 major cities where Islam was being spread. What were the 5 cities? Makkah, Medina, Basra, Kufa, and Sham. 2 in Iraq, Syria, and Makkah and Medina. Easy way to remember. Makkah, Medina, Basra, Kufa, and Sham. And he sent these copies there, and he basically told everyone that they need to follow these copies of the Qur'an now, and everyone had to, anyone who wasn't reciting that way or following that specific copy of the Qur'an, they were reprimanded, and they were, and their copies of the Qur'an were asked to be burnt. And this was one of the major historical events that took place, where Uthman bin Affan had everyone burn their copies of the Qur'an, torn and burnt. Why? Because he said we need to establish everyone on reciting from one Qur'an, even though there's variant recitations, whether you say Maliki, Maliki, whether you say you all or y'all, it's the exact same thing. So different, accents, right? So it's the same thing, but people are fighting amongst one another. Islam spreading out into the non-Arab territories and the non-Arab areas. At the time of Ali radiallahu anhu, this is where this situation erupts, where he was sitting and he was a little bit sad. So one individual comes up to him and says, well, why are you sad? So eventually it opened up that people were making mistakes in the recitation of the Qur'an. People were making mistakes in the recitation of the Qur'an. What they were doing was, instead of saying mu'minun, they're saying mu'mineen. Instead of a wow, they're putting a ya. They were changing letters. And according to, in the Semitic languages, whether it be Hebrew, whether it be Arabic, whether it be Aramaic, whatever the languages are, even Phoenician, in these languages, what happens is changing one vowel can totally switch the whole meaning. So mu'minun and mu'mineen are 2 totally different, one is the subject, one is the object, and the whole meaning becomes distorted. So, وَرَسُولُهُ or وَرَسُولِهِ, the meaning becomes distorted. Even though the word means the same thing, prophets, but then in one place you're making it into an object, one place you're making it into a subject. So, at that time, based on the recommendation of Ali radiallahu anhu, one individual by the name of Abu al-Aswad al-Du'ali, he came into the forefront and he said, you know what, I'm going to compile what we call Arabic grammar. So he wrote the first book on Arabic grammar. Why? Because if someone comes up to you and speaks English in a very bad way, what are you going to tell them? Go learn English. Right or wrong? And what do you mean when you say go learn English? Go learn grammar. Right. If someone doesn't know, and someone comes up to you and says I don't want to speak in bad English, but if someone comes up here and says something very bad English, you tell them to go learn English. And then they're going to go to an English class, ESL or whatever, and they're going to sit down and they're going to teach them grammar. When you pronounce this like that. And then when you are talking, put the subject here, put the object here. And that's how you learn how to speak a language. Correct or incorrect? Back then, this is what we need to understand. When someone was reciting the Qur'an in a very bad way, they would tell them, go learn Arabic. They would tell them, go learn Arabic. They never told them, go learn Tajweed. Us Muslims, we became lazy over time. And now we don't want to learn anything. We're just really lazy. We'd rather just tell us how to do it and we'll just pronounce it that way. No. You see, it used to be an idea, go learn Arabic grammar. What was the reason Arabic grammar codified and became what we call ilm al-nahu, Arabic grammar? Because of the fact that people were making mistakes in the recitation of the Qur'an. Someone was saying, Na'udhu billahi inna Allaha bari'un min al-mushrikeen wa rasulih. Or rather, inna Allaha bari'un min al-mushrikeen wa rasuluh. The whole meaning becomes distorted. So keeping this in mind, the idea came into the picture that we need to codify what we call Arabic grammar. So Abu al-Aswad al-Du'ali, he sat down with a few pieces of paper and he wrote down a few rules of how to speak Arabic. Well, when you are reciting, you're speaking Arabic, you need to put this here, you need to put that there, you need to put the fa'il, fa'il, and maf'ul, you need to put the mudaf and the mudaf ilayh, the harf al-jar and the majrur, all these different rules. And he showed it to Ali radiallahu anhu. Ali radiallahu anhu looked at it and he said, I'm not the cell phone, but he looked at it and sorry, so used to being on the phone. And he's like, well, this is really, really good. This is a beautiful path that you have taken. And some people have said ilm al-nahu was actually named because of that specific incident that took place. From that point on, really enjoying the lecture. So anyways, from that point on, Arabic grammar was that which was becoming more predominant in the world. You get it? People were focusing on Arabic grammar and they were learning Arabic so that they can recite the Qur'an properly. They were learning Arabic grammar so that they can, be, more fluent in the recitation of the Qur'an. Muslims needed that because Muslims, when you become a Muslim, the first thing that you learn is you learn the Fatiha. We say the Shahada in Arabic. We say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. We say it in Arabic. We recite the Qur'an in Arabic. We pray in Arabic. So it becomes really, it becomes very important for the Muslims to actually learn Arabic language. So grammar comes into the picture because Muslims are not speaking Arabic properly. And now, within an Arab, if an Arab were to say, Inna Allaha bari'un min al-mushrikeen wa rasuluh versus Inna Allaha bari'un min al-mushrikeen wa rasulih, for people who speak Arabic, that's a very big mistake. That's a very big mistake. True or false, Arabs? Rasul, very big mistake. But for someone who's not Arab, for them it's like, dude, what's the big deal? It's versus E. I am going to eat dinner. I eat dinner going to. He said the same word. I just mixed it around, right or wrong. Yes? It's the same thing, but no, that's not how you speak. Because when it comes to the languages in Arabic, the whole meaning can change. So I told one person, I said, who told you how to speak in English? I can delegate gooder than you. Right? And that person thought I was really, really good English. Somebody thought that was very bad English. You don't tell English, you speak it. I was telling the English gooder than you. Meaning my English is better than you. You didn't get it. So, the idea here, we wanted to, preserve this recitation of the Qur'an because people were making mistakes. Arabs knew what the mistakes were. Arabs knew that Daraba Zaydun Amran was different than Daraba Zaydan Amrun. Just dun versus done, meaning changes. So, they, started having this little bit of an issue here. And the non-Arabs came into the picture and they were making mistakes in this recitation of the Qur'an. I'm going to go a little bit fast now, because right now we're talking at the time of Ali radiallahu anhu. One individual by the name of Khalil bin Ahmad Farahidi, he was actually the first person, as mentioned by historians, to have written a book on Arabic grammar. The book that he wrote was called Kitab al-Ayn. Kitab al-Ayn, you can download copies of it. The name is Farahidi, Kitab al-Ayn. If you just Google him on Wikipedia, they have a nice picture or something of him as well. Interesting. I don't know how, but it's there. I mean, he lived, 200, 300 Hijri. Anyways, after him, a person that was very, very close to him, they're really, really close, and he only died 10 years after him, was an individual by the name of Sibawayh. How many of you heard of that name? Raise your hand. Sibawayh. Good. So Sibawayh was a very, very great grammarian, and he also came into the picture about 60, 70 years after Sibawayh. I believe it was 60, 70 years. My dates are not coming to me. But there was when one individual by the name of Ibn Mujahid, Abu Bakr ibn Mujahid, came into the picture. Remember these names. And you're taking my course in Tajwi, so you're going to see these names all the time. So Sibawayh compiled a book known as Al-Kitab. And this book, Al-Kitab, nowadays they publish it in about 5 volumes. And it's called Qur'an al-Nahwa. It's called the Qur'an of grammar. It's so beautiful, and it's got all of the rules of Arabic grammar in there, and the authority of the Basran grammar school of thought. And from that point on, you see, from the time of Ali radiallahu anhu, Khalil bin Ahmad comes into the picture, Nasr al-Laythi comes into the picture, Sibawayh is into the picture. The concept of grammar erupted all of a sudden. And of the famous variant recitations of the famous Qur'an, the great reciters of the Qur'an, Kisa'i was an authority of Arabic grammar from the Kufa school of thought. Abu Amr bin Ala, who was the third reciter of the Qur'an, was also the head of the Basran school of thought. So Arabic grammar, a lot of Arabic grammar was that which dictated the recitation of the Qur'an, which became a little bit of an issue now. You see, because when it becomes an issue, we want to preserve the recitation of the Qur'an, letter for letter, word for word, accent by accent. Every single letter should be pronounced properly. So then you pick up books that we call I'rab al-Qur'an. I'rab al-Qur'an means the grammatical analysis of the Qur'an. And these books that talk about the grammatical analysis of the Qur'an, if you just were to just pick up the first 2 or 3 chapters, you would see, and this is what I call the fitnah of the grammarians. This is where you see a lot of the fitnah coming into the picture. Because Surah Al-Fatiha is the first surah that we read in the Qur'an. And if you were to pick up very, very extensive books on I'rab al-Qur'an, there are certain books which are 10, 12 volumes. I have them in the library, 10, 12 volumes. Nice books. You pick it up, and the first thing they tell you, they say, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. They say, Yajuzu. Grammatically, it's correct for you to say Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, and Alhamdulillah. They say grammatically it's correct. And then they give their grammatical explanations for it. They say, well, if it was Alhamdulillah, then this is what the meaning would be. And this is what the, for those of you who know Arabic grammar, this is what the taqdeer or the hidden verb is. If it was Alhamdulillah, then this is the grammatical explanation for it. And then they say, Rabbil Alameen. They say, وَيَجُوزُ, and it's also permissible for you to grammatically say, Rabbul Alameen, Rabbil Alameen, and Rabbal Alameen. In the Qur'an, what do we read? Alhamdulillahi Rabbil. We say Rabbil Alameen. But it does say grammatically it's permissible for you to say Rabba, Rabbu, and Rabbi. Now what happens, and then they give their explanation for it. They say, the reason this is the case is if it's Rabbu, then it's because it's Mubtada and Khabar. If it's Rabba, it's because it's a Fi'al Mahdhuf, a hidden verb. And if it's Rabbi, it's they give about 5 or 6 different explanations. This is what I call objectification. Because see, according to me, I just care about what Allah told me. He told me Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, and I could care less behind what He did not tell me. He didn't tell me Alhamda or Alhamdi, and He didn't tell me Rabba and Rabbu. At that point He said Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And then this issue comes into the picture. And all of this starts off because a lot of the people who were not Arabs who were reciting the Qur'an, they were making mistakes. Grammar came into the picture. And when grammar came into the picture, Muslims started learning Arabic grammar. Wow, this is so beautiful. We're learning Arabic grammar. We're learning, fi'al, fa'il, maf'ul, ism, fi'al, harf, jar, the different types of ism, munsarif, munsarif, all these different things. And we're learning, mu'arab and mabni, where to put the fatha, dhamma, kasra, all of these things are really, really beautiful. Everyone knew Arabic grammar. And when everyone knows Arabic grammar, then This is where I'm going to skip and go a little bit fast now. This is where Ibn Mujahid comes into the picture. Ibn Mujahid, Abu Bakr ibn Mujahid, was one of the greatest scholars of Islam. He was one of the greatest scholars of Islam. How many of you heard of the name Abu Bakr ibn Mujahid? Raise your hand. You heard of the name Abu Bakr ibn Mujahid? Where is it? Did I study history?
Yeah, well, church history.
There you go. Abu Bakr ibn Mujahid is in there. So, he writes a book. And this book is called Kitab al-Sab'a fil Qira'at. I have the book. Kitab al-Sab'a fil Qira'at, the book on the 7 recitations of the Qur'an. First book ever to be written on this specific topic. At the same time, within the same era, there's another individual by the name of Abu Mazahim Khaqani. How many of you heard of that name? Abu Mazahim Khaqani? No. Okay, good. Something I know that you don't know. I'm just kidding. So Abu Mazahim Khaqani, same time, he is the first person ever to write a book on Tajweed. No one before him has ever written on Tajweed. At that time, they didn't even call it Tajweed. You see, the word Tajweed in Arabic means to beautify. The word Tajweed in Arabic means to beautify. Jawwada, yujawwidu, to make something beautiful. When someone used to recite the Qur'an in a beautiful way, they would say, MashaAllah, good Tajweed. They would say, Jayyid, Jawwada, beautiful, this is amazing, good for you. Abu Bakr ibn Mujahid, Khaqani, same era, contemporaries, the first person to ever write on Tajweed. Here's the difference. Khaqani wrote on Tajweed, it was in form of poetry. It was in form of poetry. أقول مقالا معجبا لأولي الحجر ولا فخر أن الفخر يدعو إلى الكبر. And this is Khaqani style. He wrote a poem on Tajweed, the first book ever written on Tajweed, Qasida Khaqaniya or Qasida Ra'iyya. About, a few years later, not centuries, I'm talking about maybe 20, 30 years later, around that time was the birth of another individual by the name of Makki bin Abu Talib. How many of you heard of that name? He was a very great Sufi individual, a great Sufi saint. His name was Makki bin Abi Talib, and he's an authority in Tajweed. He's one of the greatest authorities in Tajweed. People have quoted him all the time, and this individual was the first person to write a book on Tajweed that was not written in poetry. Same time as Makki bin Abi Talib, this is where it gets very interesting. Same time was an individual from Spain whose name was Abu Amr ad-Dani. How many of you heard of that name? Wow. Okay, remember these names. Ibn Mujahid, Khaqani, Makki bin Abi Talib, Abu Amr ad-Dani. There's more names, but I like these names a lot because I like to memorize their books, that's why. So, Abu Amr ad-Dani from Spain, Spaniard, Abu Amr ad-Dani, very, very great scholar and very interesting individual. Remember these names, put these names aside. Now that we have these names aside, one thing that I learned being an academic and being a historian, one thing that I learned being a historian is everything that people talk about is contextual. Except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says something in the Qur'an, it's applicable that time, it's applicable before, and it's applicable after. Because in the realm of God, time and space does not exist. Get it? When I say time and space does not exist, it's beyond us now. It's like, oh my God. When I say time and space does not exist, I mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created time, so you cannot say that God is confined by time. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if the Qur'an is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is beyond time and space. So if the Qur'an says something, it is as applicable then as it is applicable now, as it is going to be applicable thousands of years from now, because in reality there was no time. You get it? Very philosophical, but don't worry. You sleep, you wake up in the morning, you're like, oh my God, there's no such thing as time. Okay, anyways. So keeping that concept in mind, this situation, you have these 4 individuals. As a historian, I read something, and when I read something, I realize that that thing that was written is contextual. And let me give you an example that every one of us is going to understand. Some of the scholars of fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, according to Islam, if an individual wants to divorce his wife and he needs to say, I divorce you, right? He needs to say, I divorce you. If he uses the word divorce, then it's going to count as one divorce. And he says it 2 times, and then he says it 3 times. That becomes 3 divorces. Okay, so far so good? 3 divorces. If an individual does not use the words of divorce, rather says, get out of here, and in his mind he's intending divorce, then automatically 3 takes place, according to the Hanafi school of thought. According to the Hanafi school of thought, 3 divorces happen. So, if for a wife to be totally divorced from her husband, he needs to say the word divorce 3 times. And if he says it once, then she needs to, basically live in that way without him going back to his wife for 3 months. And once 3, or if she's pregnant and so she delivers the baby, and then after that the divorce is going to be finalized. So anyhow, a little bit complicated, but in the books of Islamic law, there was one thing I was reading. If a husband goes to his wife and says, I give you that many divorces, exactly that. If we can cut down talking because I'm losing concentration. Okay, anyways, a person goes up to his spouse and says, I give you that many divorces. How many is that? How many? Huh? No, so that was 1, 2, or 3. But there's a possibility of 1, 2, 3, or there's just a possibility of 2. I meant these 2 because the thumb doesn't count. But what I'm trying to say is within the books of fiqh, you'll see that some scholars say that's 3, some say that's 2, some say, they say 2 because it's 1, 2, and some say that's 5. There's so much issues there. Now, what was the reason the scholar of fiqh brought up this fifth issue? Why? Because someone actually said that to his wife, right on. Or else you think this guy will just think of a scenario? That just makes you really crazy. Like, really? Can Muslims fly and pray? Like, how? It doesn't make any sense. It's contextual. It actually happened. That's why the ruling came into existence. They say that when a Muslim is praying, you need to put something in front of you so that, when you put something in front of you, then people can cross. Because you're not supposed to cross in front of someone who's praying. Why? Because there was a time when people crossed in front of someone who was praying. Or the fiqh ruling that says that don't pray next to an exit. Because people need to leave. Right? And you can't cross in front of them. Why do they say that? Because the situation took place. That's why they brought it up. People don't make up hypothetical situations. Sometimes they may. Well, hypothetically this happens, but you cannot have that many hypothetical situations. Everything is contextual. Get it? Based on this idea, which is contextual, what's very interesting, very, very interesting, is at that time, Khatani was the first person who ever wrote a book on Tajweed. Makki bin Abi Talib, he wrote a book on Tajweed as well, but that was right after him. Ibn Mujahid, he mentions one thing in his book. He says, what does he say? And I'll give you another example here. Let's say there was a war that was taking place. Remember the Gulf War? Remember the Gulf War? Happened so many years ago, right? Let's say someone's standing up to make dua after the Jummah khutbah, and he makes dua for the Muslims fighting in the Gulf War. What are you going to say? Like, let's say next week, someone stands up there and makes dua for the Muslims who are fighting in the Gulf War. What are you going to tell them? The war is over. Right? Why are you talking about it for? It's done. So, keep this concept in mind. If Abu Amr ad-Dani says something in his book, would you believe that it's contextual, yes or no? Of course it is. It's relevant to that time. It's not going to be that, it was over there just echoing what the other person said. Every single one of them said one thing. They said that the Hafiz who memorizes the Qur'an is of three types of people. Number one, that Hafiz who memorized the Qur'an who knows Arabic grammar. That Hafiz who memorizes the Qur'an that does not know Arabic grammar but speaks Arabic. And that Hafiz who memorizes the Qur'an that does not speak Arabic, does not know Arabic grammar, and just memorize the Qur'an that way. 3 types. Got it? One person, number one, you are Hafiz. Number two, you're Hafiz. Number three, you're Hafiz. The difference in all three of you, you speak Arabic, you know Arabic grammar, meaning you speak in Arabic grammar, and you don't speak anything, you just memorize the Qur'an like a parrot. Got it? Most of the people in the world are this type of person here. Most of the people in the world have memorized the Qur'an like a parrot. When I memorized the Qur'an, I did not know Arabic grammar. I was reciting it, and I had no idea what I was reciting. Eventually, I learned. Most of the people in the world are that. What we call bid'ah. What is bid'ah? Bid'ah means to make part of religion that which is not religion. And bid'ah is wrong. So at that point, Ibn Mujahid mentioned something. He says regarding those huffaz that memorize the Qur'an, that knew Arabic grammar, that one individual, he said these people are those who make a lot of bid'ah in the recitation of the Qur'an. These are those people who make a lot of bid'ah in the recitation of the Qur'an. Get it? Why? Because they know Arabic grammar. So when you know Arabic grammar, what do you think? You think that, oh my God, I've been exposed to this great thing, which we call Arabic grammar, which means that even if I were to say this word this way, or if I were to say the word that way, the meaning won't change. Get it? Also, if I were to say this, and if I were to say that, the meaning won't change. Oh my God, the Qur'an is so beautiful and so great that if I were to say Alhamdu, Alhamdu, Alhamdi, there's all these different possibilities. Now what happened is this opened up to a lot of the general people that were sitting there, and they're like, oh my God, this is so interesting. And so many made up recitations came into the world. What people were saying, Alhamda, Alhamdu, Alhamdi, the reciters of the Qur'an were like, no, this is why Arabic grammar came into existence, so we can teach the people not to say that, and now they're indulging in that fitnah. Yes? So what they started doing, objectifying it. They're like, you can say, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, and these are the different, possibilities. You see, it takes place now in the world, but from a very different point of view. How? Because we don't know Arabic grammar, what we tend to do is we tend to mold the meaning of the Qur'an based on what we want it to be. So we build an idea in our head, right? We build an idea in our head, and then we take the Quranic verse and we say, well, this is what the Qur'an actually means, but truly that's really not what it meant. That's not really what it meant. That was just you making up your own understanding of the verses of the Qur'an. You want to understand it, go back into history. Don't look at it from your rear view mirror. Go back into it and you'll see it from a very, very more clear way. So now people were starting to make up recitations. Ibn Mujahid noticed this, and again, he was an individual who was at a higher authority. He's the one who, I guess, initiated the killing of Al-Hallaj. Anyone heard of Al-Hallaj? The one who used to say Al-Haq. He used to run around saying Al-Haq, Al-Haq, and even when they killed him, he would start dipping his fingers in his blood and writing on the walls Al-Haq. That's the story say. And based on this, they went and they hung him. And some people say that Ibn Mujahid was one of those individuals who was, what initiated this as well. But anyhow, this fitnah started spreading in the world. And now these great scholars, keep in mind, you see these three types of individuals, and which one was the worst? The one who knew Arabic grammar. Why were they the worst? Because they were making up these recitations. Not necessarily making up recitations, but they had opened the door. There's something in Arabic which we call Saddul Bab. It's a very, very famous usul of fiqh. Saddul Bab basically means that many times something can be allowed, but you're not going to allow them to do it. Why? Because opening the door can lead to so many more problems. Technically, it's allowed. That's why when a mufti would give a fatwa to a specific individual, they would tell them, this is only for you. Not for everyone else. Specific for you. Because what happens is if this person leaks it out to everyone else, Everyone's situation is different. Saddul bab, closing the door. And it can happen in so many different ways. A lot of the laws that are made in the world are there for saddul bab. Saddul bab, for example, if it's a red light, then make sure you stop. But it's 2 in the morning. There's not a single person on the street. There's no police there either. And even if there was a police pulls you over because you ran the red light. And the police says, why did you run the red light? He said, because there's no one there. And then you start to argue with the police, say, well, the reason behind the red light, police officer, you see, because I studied law, the reason why the red light was put into the picture was because there was chaos. So there needed to be some sort of system put into place, right or wrong. If there was no red light or green light, what would happen? Everyone would just be going to be chaos and people getting in accidents. Keep this concept in mind. So we created the red light and the green light and the yellow light, right? Yeah, green means go, red means stop, and yellow means go faster, right? So anyways, no, it doesn't mean stop. So when we have this idea here, this law is created, put into place, and now you follow it. It doesn't matter what happens. It's not done for saddul bab purposes. Perhaps it may have been, but it doesn't matter. Even if it's in the middle of the night, you need to stop at a red light, right or wrong. And I stopped at a red light. It was very late at night, and my wife was in the car, and the light wasn't turning green. And there's a guy in front of me, so he just went. It's not turning green. So then I pulled up, and I'm like, it's not turning green. And my wife was like, you need to follow ethics. Ethically, you need to stay stopped here until it turns green. I'm like, yeah, but there's no buts. Follow the rule. So police right there. So anyways, I decided that I'll take the right turn, and then make a U-turn, and then keep on going. You see, that's the nice way out of it. So see, when I took the right turn, I made a U-turn, that thing turned red, and this turned green. So, saddul bab, closing the door. Sometimes when we leave the door open, people will come up with their own explanations. A lot of problems can happen. So, a system is put into place. Why is a system put into place? So that you follow it and you just be good. Get it? That's my subjective nature saying, be good. Because I normally don't say that in university when I'm teaching a class. I want to be good. Because I need to explain why I'm telling them to be good. So, created a system, everyone's following the system, no one's questioning the system. Now, can a Muslim be pulled over? Muslim at the red light, runs the red light, police pulls him over, police comes up, and the police happens to be a Muslim police also. That's beautiful. Muslim police. I went into London. You see, as a Muslim, I get a lot of trouble when I'm crossing the border. A lot of trouble. People ask me all kinds of questions. And I'm like, dude, I'm human. Take my topi off. There you go. No, you have a beard. Anyway, they get a lot of questions. They harass me so much. Oh my God. Crazy. I went Heathrow Airport to get off the airport, and then they have the customs or they have the immigration there. And from the corner of my eye, I see there's a hijabi customs or immigration officer. I'm like, Allah, please let me go there. Because she understands, she's a Muslim also. Alhamdulillah, I think that dua was accepted because it was my turn and she called me. She said, So I went, I'm like, and I stood there, like, do I say salam, do I not say salam? Islam tells me to say salam, but it's going to look like I'm flirting or I don't know what's going through my head. Random stuff going through my head. I went up and she said, Assalamu alaikum. I was like, Alaikum salam. Here's my passport. And then she's like, where are you going? I'm just going to university in West Yorkshire. All right, there you go. Go. I was like, oh my God, subhanAllah. Police officer pulls you over, let's say, for example, you ran the red light, police officer pulls you over, comes up to your car. Is it okay for you to say, officer, it does not say anywhere in the Qur'an for me to stop at the red light? No. What's the police going to say? That's true. You're right, got a point. Go. Follow the Qur'an. Police will never say that to you, right? That just would be really weird. But is it fard for you? Ask a question, Kevin. Is it fard, Islamically, for you to stop at the red light? Yes or no? Say no. And some say yes, some say is it fard? Is it compulsory? Religiously compulsory? Yes or no? Some say yes, some say no. Keep that question for you, inshallah. And if you don't want to answer that question, I dare you to run all the red lights on the way home. But valid question: is it fard for you to follow that law? Yes or no? Okay, good. Scholars of Tajweed have said reciting the Qur'an with Tajweed is fard. They said reciting the Qur'an with Tajweed is not fard. Whoever does not recite the Qur'an with Tajweed is committing a sin. Now, we have this light example. This is where I'm finishing my lecture right after this. We have the example of lights, and we have the example of police pulling you over, all this good stuff. Ibn Mujahid comes into the picture. All these grammarians caused us open the door. They didn't set good bad. They opened the door where people were starting to make up recitations of the Qur'an based on making this grammatical analysis based on this and based on that. And you know why Allah said this, and you know why Allah said that. And the word al is here because of this, and iyaka is before the word na'budu because of this. And grammatically, it's okay for you to say, you know, alam tara kayfa fa'ala, you know, rabbuka, rabbuki, rabbuka, rabbika, whatever you want to say. All of these things are, correct. You know, grammatically they're correct. But from a scientist's point of view, it makes sense. But from someone who's not a scientist, it does not make any sense. So, for example, if a doctor was talking to another doctor and said something is okay, you know, in medicine, and someone who wasn't a doctor overheard them, is it okay for that doctor to refer to that individual to refer to the doctor's conversation and say, well, it's okay for me to take that medicine, yes or no? It's not, because it was the two specialists that were talking. When specialists have a conversation, sometimes it's best that the non-specialists don't sit in, because you get the wrong idea. You see? You get the wrong idea. Get what I'm trying to say? So a bunch of scholars were talking there, they're talking about grammatical differences. A non-scholar was sitting in. And the biggest problem as a scholar of Islam, the biggest problem that I have is where everyone in the world becomes a scholar of Islam. See, every Muslim is technically a scholar of Islam. That didn't make any sense to me, because the month of Ramadan came into the picture, and in the beginning of the month of Ramadan, the whole issue regarding what day to start the month of Ramadan. And then all of these people, they came to me, they're like, Sheikh, we need to start the month of Ramadan here. We need to follow this, okay, we need to follow. I'm like, dude, are you even a scholar? Don't let the scholars decide your Sharia for you. It's not up to you to determine the Sharia. We scholars will sit down and we'll put our scholarly minds in there and we're going to figure this out. And you have to just follow us. If you're a doctor, then you decide your scholarly doctor medicine opinions within your doctor folk. But within ourselves, leave it up to the scholars, you see. Leave it up to the scholars to determine what the Sharia is saying. You don't come into the picture. But now what happened is, saddul bab, closing the door. The door was open and these grammarians, they started talking this way. And that's why Ibn Mujahid listed these three types of people, remember? And the worst was those people who are making up recitations, yes or no? Because they're making innovations. Very interesting. I was reading Makki bin Abi Talib's book. It's called Kitab al-Ri'ayah. It's called al-Ri'ayah. And has a very ugly front cover, by the way. So, that's the book. I opened it up, and he said the same thing. Three types. They said four types of hafal. I don't want to get into the details of who the fourth type is. That's a different story altogether. But he mentions these same three types, and this worst was this bid'ah guy who was making up the recitations. You see? Yeah? This fourth guy. This third individual. He existed at Makki bin Abi Talib's time as well. Everything they write is what? Contextual. Meaning that fitna existed at that time. Abu Amr ad-Dani, he writes his book, he mentions exactly the same three types of people in his book. What does that mean? That means that fitna was so popular at that time. People were making up these recitations, and there was people who knew Arabic grammar. What were they doing? It started off as something good, but the door was eventually open and people started making up these recitations and talking about the Qur'an, objectifying the Qur'an in a very wrong way. Because now they're saying, well, it's if we say it like this is what it means. If we say it like that, that's what it means. If we say it like this is what it means. Pick up the books, you'll see it for yourself. At that point, we need to lay down the law. How do we lay down the law? Abu Bakr bin Mujahid and a few of the other scholars at that point in time, they laid down the law. They said, you have to recite the Qur'an according to one of the 7 ways. That's it. If anyone recites different from the 7 ways, you will be reprimanded, you will be beat. You understand? And now as for those individuals who were mixing up the recitation of the Qur'an because they didn't know, you need to recite the Qur'an following the rules of recitation. Tajweed is fard. It was like that red light. You need to stop or else there's going to be chaos. So, from this point of view, this science came into existence, the science of Tajweed. Why? Because of this grammarian fitnah that was taking place. And all of a sudden, this chaos became controlled. They established the light system. If you're reciting in according to one of the 7 recitations, Nafi', Ibn Kathir, Abu Amr, Ibn Amir, Asim, Hamza, Kisa'i, then you're totally fine. It's good. You're allowed to. If you're reciting in any other way, stop. You're not allowed to recite that way. Some people were like, yeah, but I heard my recitation from my teacher, and he heard it from his teacher, he heard it from this companion. I don't care where he got it from. We need to establish the law. You get it? We need to create the system here because there's chaos happening in the world. And as for you individuals, you need to learn to recite the Qur'an properly. Because of you not reciting it properly, there's this problem in the world. People are mixing up the recitations of the Qur'an. So what did they do? They said, you know what? Tajweed, fard. You have to recite the Qur'an according to the rules of recitation. There's no questions asked. So if someone comes up to you and tells you, well, you know what? There's no verse of the Qur'an or there's no hadith that says that you're supposed to recite the Qur'an with tajweed, what are you going to say? You're right, there isn't. There's no verse of the Qur'an that tells you you have to specifically follow these rules of tajweed. There isn't. Yeah, scholars of tajweed, they've come up to me and they've literally argued with me on this issue. They say, well, there's a verse Barakātuh in Qur'an at 13. I'm like, no scholar of tafsir said that means tajweed. None. Look it up in the books. Who are you, the Tajweed scholar, to interpret the verses of the Qur'an? Are you a scholar of tafsir? Let the doctors decide the medicine. Let the scholars of hadith tell you what the hadith means. Let the scholars of tafsir tell you what the verse of the Qur'an means. Don't try to change the meaning of the verse of the Qur'an to fit your understanding. But what you as an individual need to understand is, why is tajweed fard? Why was tajweed fard at that time? Why? Because they wanted to preserve that pure recitation of the Qur'an. Why do we recite the Qur'an with tajweed now? Is it really preserved? We just want to beautify our recitation of the Qur'an. It's a different mindset. It's a totally different mindset. Where do we learn this from? History. You go back into history, the whole idea was preserve the recitation of the Qur'an. Why do you think Uthman bin Affan told everyone, here are the copies of the Qur'an, everyone else burn your copies? Why? Because he did not want anyone reciting any other way. Why? We want to preserve this specific version, this specific Qur'an. And that was preserved from the time of Abu Bakr, it was preserved at the time of Umar, it was preserved at the time of Uthman, it was preserved at the time of Ali radiallahu anh, it was preserved by Abu al-Aswad al-Du'ali, where the idea came into the mind, we need to codify rules of recitation for these people who are making mistakes. And the rules of recitation, when people started learning a lot of Arabic, and they started, doing a lot of fitnah. You see, doctors, if you want to be a pure, proper doctor, you need to work below a doctor, right or wrong. You need to work with the doctor, side by side for years, correct? And when you work side by side with the doctor for years, eventually you learn, things that you're supposed to do, things that you're not supposed to do. But someone who does not spend this time with the doctors, they don't know. So they think that, they know the theory. Based on the theory, you can mix these medicines and perhaps make a cure for something else. But experienced doctors are going to say, no, you can't do that. Why can't you do it? Just you can't. Well, the theory tells me that this is the cure for stomach aches. Don't laugh at me. And this is the cure for headaches. So if we mix the medicines together, then we can have a cure for stomach and headaches. There you go. And the experienced doctors are, no, we just don't do that. Well, there's nothing that's written in the books of medicine about it. Well, it doesn't matter if it's written or not. We just don't do it. So there's no explanation for it. For a lot of religion, there's no explanation for it. And that's why when it comes towards the understanding of the Qur'an, we just take it. We take it and we read it and we try to understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us. But That is why at that time, the people were reciting the Qur'an. They were close to the Prophet ﷺ. They were reciting the Qur'an and they had Arabic grammar and they were understanding. They're like, wow, this is such a beautiful thing. Arabic grammar, Quranic recitation. As it moved forward towards individuals who, did not respect Islam too much, then they started using Arabic grammar, started spreading this fitnah. And started saying, well, it's like this, it's like that. You can say this, you can say that grammatically, this is correct, that's what we're talking about. And you objectify the Qur'an. When the whole idea behind this was we need to preserve the Qur'an. And when the idea comes into the picture, we need to preserve the Qur'an. Ibn Mujahid comes in and says, here's the lights, red light, green light. That's it, there's no yellow. Red light or green light, you need to follow this. If you're doing this, good. If you're not doing this, stop. If someone came into their house or whatever and did not recite with tajweed, they would say you're committing a sin religiously. Astaghfirullah. What do you mean I'm committing a sin? Well, you are. It's wrong. It's haram for you not to recite with tajweed because we're here to create a system. You have to do it. And what did that system do? That system really helped us out right now. How did it help us out? Nowadays in the world, people are reciting with tajweed. There's this awareness of tajweed now. We need to recite with tajweed. We need to recite with tajweed. Why? We think we want to beautify the recitation of the Qur'an. All we're doing is we're preserving this recitation for the next generation. It's a lot more stronger. You see, they did it then because they loved the Qur'an. We do it now. Why? Because, well, the scholars told us we're supposed to. It's theoretical. You get what I'm saying? Why do we wake up for Fajr? Because Islam tells us to do so. Do you love it? You have a different mindset. Why did they recite the Qur'an with tajweed at that time? They loved it. They didn't want anything to change it. Why do we recite with tajweed right now? Because the books tell us. It's a different mindset. Totally different mindset. If we understand that history, we'll realize that they really loved the Qur'an because that was the only form of guidance that they had at that time. And they stepped firm and they memorized it, they respected it, they were really, really close to it. And that's what they kept with them. If we look at ourselves now, the situation, it's a lot more different. It's a lot more different. Perhaps the love is there, but the objectification is clearly there. That's why the people who try to recite the Qur'an with tajweed, they sit there, they prepare, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. I'm like, dude, that's not how you're supposed to recite the Qur'an. Recite it in a beautiful manner, recite it in a nice manner, recite it in a beautiful way, but bring that recitation of the Qur'an into your heart. Do you understand Rabbul Alameen, the concept that Allah, God, Allah is the Lord of the universe? Did you understand this at all? Or are you just trying to make your recitation that way? The tajweed is really, really good. But if it is accompanied with the understanding of the Qur'an, then that's good. If it's not accompanied with the understanding of the Qur'an, then you're just wasting your time doing what you're doing. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives us the ability to understand, the idea behind the recitation of the Qur'an. We need to recite the Qur'an. We need to recite it with tajweed. So if you ask me, is tajweed fard? I'll say, yeah, it's fard. You have to do it. It's compulsory. And we need to be able to memorize as much of the Qur'an that we can. We need to understand the meaning of the Qur'an. Our idea is that the Qur'an is a book of guidance and we take guidance from the Qur'an. And that's what I'll say. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم